Hello, welcome back. This is Mr. Sanabria, and you're watching AP Macro. So today we're going to talk about production possibilities, part 2. So hopefully the light bulb will go off. That's my picture. I thought my opening slide was too boring without it. So anyway, let's just go ahead and get started. The thing that we need to do today is take what we discussed last time, which was basically an introduction to the production possibilities model, which compares the relationship between two things that you might produce and how much you possibly can produce if you are being efficient in your production. And we took that concept all the way from a ridiculous example of breakfast tacos and cars, and they cost the same amount. It was a one-for-one exchange, and then we started layering a little more complexity onto it to the point where we actually got to model the entire U.S. economy by using consumer goods and capital goods as our example. And we also noticed that it's not a one-for-one exchange, that you're going to use your best resources first for each thing. And what that really comes down to is the law of increasing opportunity cost. Because of the law of increasing opportunity cost, we see that the curve of the production possibilities, or the production possibilities frontier, is curved. It is concave to the origin. And the reason for that is because not all resources are equally well suited for the production of all goods and services. And so that's kind of a little bit of a recap on what we did last time. And so I'm going to go ahead and get us started on where we want to go now, because we're going to take this model kind of to the next level here. Okay, so here's a picture of what we did last time, right? This is a production possibilities model. We've got consumer goods, we've got capital goods. We've got the production possibilities curve itself, which is concave to the origin. And we talked about where an economy can possibly be, right? There are different places the economy could actually be. And I'm going to now do this a slightly different way than we did it last time. I'm going to call this A, B, B prime, and C. So here we are. We've got economy A, economy B, economy B prime, and economy C. Take a moment real quick, and I want you to see if you can recall what each of these means. So A, B, C, and B prime, what is the state of the economy? Go ahead and pause right now and try and do that. Don't look at your notes. Okay, hopefully you paused it, you're back, you've got answers, and you are able to tell me that economy A is recessionary. Economy B is good. It's efficient. That's the best word we're going to use for now. We're going to call that an efficient economy. You should be able to tell me that B prime is experiencing inflation. That's our inflationary economy. And C is unattainable for now. C is unattainable for now. So a few things that we want to talk about is, what does it mean for an economy to be in recession, and what does it mean for an economy to be efficient? So we're really talking about part B and point A here, okay? So point B and point A. So point B is on the curve. It's an efficient economy. And what we're really wanting to talk about today is what makes we're going to really begin this conversation, and we'll look a lot farther into it in the future. So before I go any further, let me just remind you or tell you that we're going to talk about some things at a very simple level, and you may not understand all of it yet, but we're starting to build this picture. So the thing that we want to talk about as far as how the economy is doing right now is we want to talk about GDP, which is gross domestic product. Now, what I don't want you to think you need to do is have a complete understanding of GDP right now. We're going to drill into GDP deeply in the future. For today and for basically the next several weeks, I want you to understand GDP as simply a price tag on the economy. It is the value of all the goods and services that an economy produces in a year. And so if you want to measure an economy, how big is an economy, the most common and most useful tool that we have is gross domestic product, or GDP. So what we're doing is we're talking about GDP, but what I'm saying is that's a price tag on the economy. The U.S. GDP at the filming of this video is roughly $18 trillion, the biggest in the world. So what I'm saying to you right now is that if you are at point B, your GDP is as big as it should be because you're efficient, right? GDP is as high as it should be. Now, you might be saying, well, what about B prime there? What that means is GDP here is actually a little higher than it should be. And let's not worry about why I'm saying it should be, okay? GDP is just a little higher than you want it. Right here, GDP is right where you want it. That is the most efficient level of GDP. So the size of the economy is ideal. And so right here at point A, where you have a recession, GDP is lower than you want it. We have lost some GDP, or we are experiencing GDP loss. We are in a recession. The size of the economy is not as large as it could be. There are resources that are not being used. Maybe there's factories that have that aren't working. There's nobody in them working. They're not turned on. We don't have a production process happening in these factories, right? That is an example of some capital that is not being used. Okay, so what about point C here? Well, that would be great if we had that much GDP maybe, but we can't. It's unattainable for now. And we're going to talk in a few minutes here about how we might get there. Okay, so we've talked about where we are in terms of GDP, and that is called production. GDP is production. Remember, I told you GDP is the price tag of the economy. It's the market value of the goods and services produced in an economy in a year. So what we're going to call B is full production. So here we have B, full production. But it's something else as well. We want to talk about another thing, and we want to talk about employment. So when you talk about point B here, I want you talking about an economy that is in full production and full employment. So actually I put or, I'm going to put and. I want to change that to and because I want you to realize that this is both. It's full production, full employment. Full production and full employment. So what is full employment? Well, first off, we are talking about jobs. We're talking about the unemployment rate. Okay? And so you probably understand the unemployment rate to some extreme or extent. That unemployment is the jobless number, right? Who has a job, who specifically with unemployment, who doesn't have a job. What percentage of people who should have a job don't have a job? So what you might be surprised to learn right now is that the unemployment rate at full employment, so stay with me here, employment is full, right? We're at full employment. The unemployment rate is not zero. The unemployment rate, and I'm going to put unemployment as UE there, is about 5%. At full employment, and this is critical, make sure this is going into your notes. At full employment, unemployment is about 5%. And for the purposes of AP macroeconomics, we are going to call it a hard, fast 5%. Why? Well, you can't use calculators in this course, and 5% is an easy number to work with. In reality, economists would say it's somewhere between 4.5 and 5.5% in the United States. So in the United States, for reasons we will discuss in the future, and I know that you're probably very curious about why this is the case, but you just got to trust me for now. In the United States, the full employment rate of unemployment is between 4.5 and 5.5%. For this course, just call it 5%. So I'm going to take out my squiggly line, and I want you to just understand that we are going to talk about 5% unemployment as full employment. I want to give you another term that we can talk about. If at 5% unemployment, we have full employment, then we would call 5% unemployment the natural rate of unemployment, or the NRU. So we're learning some new terms today that you need to be making sure end up in your notes. Okay, the natural rate of unemployment, or the NRU, is 5%. And again, that's for the United States. Other countries have different natural rates of unemployment. Okay, so full employment, natural rate of unemployment, NRU, are all the same, and they're 5%. And that's what you're experiencing now. To bring this back to the model, that's what you're experiencing at point B, an efficient economy where everything's working the way we want it. So what do you think is happening at point A, where we've experienced some GDP loss? Well, remember that factory that I said might not be working, there's nobody in there? Well, the people who should be in there are unemployed. And so what you find at point A is unemployment rate above the natural rate. Unemployment above the natural rate. So what am I saying here? What I'm really saying here, unemployment is above 5%. Unemployment is above 5%. So we have some amount of unemployment above 5%. It might only be 5.5%. It might be 7%. It might be 10%. But unemployment is above 5%. Well, we've got one more. B prime. Somehow, with B prime, unemployment is below the natural rate of unemployment. Unemployment is below the natural rate of unemployment. And what I'm suggesting to you is that too many people have jobs. How could that possibly be the case? Again, you gotta trust Mr. Sanabria here. We're gonna talk about it later. But for right now, what we're saying is unemployment is somehow under 5%. Unemployment is under 5%. So we have inflation, which is high prices, low value of the dollar, because we haven't actually defined inflation yet, have we? But we have inflation here. We have unemployment below 5%. At B, we've got full employment at 5%, and we've got full production. And at point A, we are underproducing, and we've got high unemployment. So those are the phases of the economy, the phases that we could find ourselves in, and how they relate to this graph, specifically talking about unemployment and GDP. So now what I want to talk about is a law. This is going to be called Okun's Law. Here's Okun's Law. I'll give you, I won't give you much time to copy it down because I know that you can pause this video. So I'm just going to go ahead and start describing it. Okun's Law states that for every 1% of unemployment above the natural rate, and what's the natural rate again? 5, Mr. Sanabria. Yes, the natural rate of unemployment is 5%. So for every 1% of unemployment above that, so say 6% unemployment, you get a 2% loss in GDP. So if the unemployment rate is 6%, then I've lost 2% of what GDP could be. By the way, if unemployment is 6%, where are you on the production possibilities model? And your answer should be, if you're looking at this one, you'd be at point A, because unemployment is greater than 5%, right? You're in a recession. And how much GDP have you lost? Well, how big? What's the impact of that actual recession? Well, it's 2% less. So what you would have here at point B, instead you have only at point A, and this point A is 2% less than it would be if it was at point B. Now I know this can be a little bit tricky for you to think of, so maybe let's throw some numbers out there. So let's do a little bit of a practice problem. We're going to leave point B and point A, but I'm erasing all of the labels. And what I want to ask you is, what would the GDP be if the value of GDP at point B was $10 trillion and unemployment at point A was 6% unemployment? Okay, so let me walk you through what's going on here. We've got, I've erased capital goods, and if that is not labeled, guess what? You don't have a production possibilities model, so you have to be careful with your graphing in this class. So capital goods, now we've got a production possibilities model. What I've shown you is that the value of output is $10 trillion, right? So GDP at point B is $10 trillion. Unfortunately, we're not actually at point B. This economy is at point A. Okay, so we want to ask ourselves, what's going on at point A here? And so if at point A, the unemployment rate is 6%, and I'm telling you that currently, and this is a fake example, not real life, but currently we do have 6% unemployment. What is GDP at point A? Well, you know Okun's law. So you know that we've got 1% of unemployment above the natural rate. So we must have experienced 2% of GDP loss. Well, 2% of $10 trillion is $0.2 trillion, right? So we have to subtract $0.2 trillion from what would be the full level of GDP. So we end up with $9.8 trillion. Does that make sense? I hope it does. If it doesn't, go ahead and replay that little chunk of the video. I want to show you how this can go back the other direction. Okay. Now what I've done is I've told you that at point A we've got 10% unemployment. That's really high. And GDP is at $10 trillion. So if at point A unemployment is at 10%, how many percentage points is unemployment above the natural rate? Well, the natural rate is 5. We're currently at 10. So we're 5% higher than the natural rate. So Okun's law would tell us that for every 1% above the natural rate, we've got 2% GDP loss, right? So we are losing 10% of GDP. So if we're losing 10% of GDP and what we actually have is $10 trillion worth of GDP, then we need to figure out what 10% of that $10 trillion is, which is $1 trillion. I made these numbers easy on purpose. And we have to add $1 trillion to that to figure out what we would have if we were at B. And so if we were at B, we would have $11 trillion of GDP. And we already know that unemployment would be at 5%. So we'd have 5% unemployment and $11 trillion of GDP. So this can go back and forth both ways. And we're going to ask you to do this in the very near future. So if you didn't understand that example, watch this again. Get with somebody in class who does understand it and figure out what you're missing on Okun's law. Okun's law is something that you're really going to have to know. So we've got one last thing that we want to talk about here. And I bet you've all just been wondering about this one. What about that point C out there? How am I ever going to get to point C? Because I've been telling you that point C is called unattainable for now, right? Unattainable for now. Well, here's the for now. If you want to get to point C, you've got to bring this entire curve out there to it. So what I'm saying is you have to actually shift the production possibilities curve. So it needs to shift outward. And I'm going to thicken that line up because I don't want you to think I'm suggesting anything with it being not as big. So we've shifted the production possibilities curve out. What was impossible now is possible. So how do you shift your production possibilities curve outward? And before we talk about that, I want you to understand that it is possible to shift it inward. What used to be possible is now no longer possible. So what is it that changes production possibilities? What is it that can change what is possible to produce? Now, I will tell you that most of the time, throughout human history, it has been a positive change. So over time, we shifted out and out and out. Further and further out, making things that were impossible more possible. If you just look around the world, you can see how true that is, right? Things that used to not be possible are now possible. But what actually causes that change? Well, we already talked about what everything is produced with. And what everything is produced with is economic resources, also known as the factors of production. Hopefully, in your mind, right now, you are saying the factors of production in your head. I'm giving you a little time to think of that. There's 4 of them. You need to have these memorized. They are land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. And you didn't think I could spell entrepreneurship, but I can. I taught myself. Land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. If you change any one or some of these, you will shift your production possibilities. And what I'm telling you is that you can get more land, you can get more labor, you can get more capital, and or you can have more new innovative ideas and initiative driving them. So if you can increase some of these, you can increase what's possible. Now, I will say that it's pretty difficult to increase some of these, right? Land, you can't just go and get new land. It's very hard to get new land, right? You could just take it from somebody who's weaker than you. I guess that's true. But that's not really what we're trying to do these days, is it? By and large, no. Labor, well, if you have a certain population, then that you're kind of capped out. Population doesn't change that quickly, right? Maybe you get a wave of immigration and you increase your labor resource. How about this for an example? In the 60s, in the United States, women overwhelmingly joined the workforce. It increased the labor supply incredibly. That pushed out our production possibilities. Now, here's the trick. You can get all of these people entering the workforce, whether it's a new demographic like women entering the workforce, or it's an increase in population like immigrants. You might think, well, I thought immigrants were taking all the jobs, right? Well, no, not really. There's a second part to this. Population increase means more labor resources. However, it is up to an economy to employ those labor resources. So remember, what we're talking about right now is pushing the production possibilities curve out. So let's talk real quick. Let's draw ourselves production possibilities model. I'm going to put CG on both of these, and one of those C stands for consumption goods and the other stands for capital goods. But what if we're humming along at full employment, full production, and we get a wave of immigration, and it pushes out our production possibilities? Why? Well, we have more labor now. We have more of one of the resources. If this dot doesn't come with it, we're in a recession now. So we have to find a way to employ that new labor resource and bring that dot out with it. Okay? So we're going to talk all about policies later, but hopefully you're getting a little more complex view of the economy already. So the other thing you can do is you can increase capital. Now here's the thing. I already told you that it's hard to find more land. It's difficult sometimes to find more labor. And entrepreneurship, well, you're in school right now and we're making you. That means we're trying to hopefully foster a little bit of entrepreneurship in you. We can't make you have good ideas, but we can create a situation where maybe you will. But there's no guarantee there. But capital. Capital is those things that we create that's going to help us make more things in the future, right? Things that will lead to increased production. And so we can very deliberately target capital. We can decide that we want to spend more of our efforts making capital goods than we do consumption goods. And every economy makes a decision, where along this curve are you going to be? If you are up here making mostly consumer goods, well then you are ignoring the possibility of making capital goods. And what you might find is that you don't have much economic growth. But if you produce over here a lot of capital goods and not very much consumption goods, then you might fuel a whole lot of economic growth. And you might notice that I've started to use a term here, economic growth. Well, what is economic growth? Economic growth is pushing this curve out and having your level of production come with it. That was economic growth. What is not economic growth? Well, let's say you're at point A here and you're in a recession. Hopefully you can see that little point A. If you're in a recession and you improve things somehow, and you drift back out here to the production possibilities frontier, and I'm going to erase these so that you understand that we were in a recession and now we're on the curve. We are at full employment, full production. Everything's great. The economy hasn't actually grown. This economy has recovered. Economic growth is shifting out your production possibilities. Hold on to that, because we are going to need to understand economic growth in the future. So let's just recap what we've learned. We've finished. That is it. That is the production possibilities model. Okay. So today we talked about where the economy is in terms of a few things. Inflation, and we didn't really hit on that much. We will in the future. But really we focused on GDP and unemployment. We talked about Okun's Law, which states that for every, I'm going to have students come in here in a second, for every 1% of unemployment, you have a 2% loss of GDP. And then finally, we talked about economic growth and shifting out your production possibilities by increasing the factors of production. Until next time, Mr. Sanabria, happy studying.